I never planned to go to war with my neighborhood. I just wanted peace, quiet, a place to breathe. After 10 years in the military, all I wanted was a slice of land where no one could tell me what to do. So when my uncle passed and left me his wooded acreage on the edge of Willow Bend, I thought I'd finally found it. 5 acres of mostly untouched land, surrounded by a pristine creek and thick trees, tucked behind the new development where all the houses looked the same and the people had matching lawn chairs. It was paradise, or so I thought. See, what I didn't realize at the time was that Willow Bend wasn't just any neighborhood. It was run by an HOA. And not just any HOA, the kind that thought they were above the law, the kind that didn't just enforce rules, they created them. They were like a tiny government with no checks and no common sense. At the head of it all, Karen Whitmore, a 50-something former real estate agent who once tried to run for local office and lost spectacularly. Since then, she'd poured all her energy into running the HOA like her own personal fiefdom. We'd met only once before everything went sideways. I had just finished clearing brush along the edge of the property line when her shiny white Lexus rolled up to the end of my long dirt driveway. She stepped out wearing pastel pink heels completely unsuited for the terrain and gave me a look like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "You must be Mr. Daniels," she said with that overly sweet voice people use when they're about to insult you. "Just Daniels is fine," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. She extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Karen Whitmore, Willow Bend Homeowners Association President. I just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." I didn't bother to shake it. "Appreciate that, but I'm not in the neighborhood. This is private land." Her smile tightened. "Yes, about that. See, the HOA considers this area to be part of our jurisdiction now. There was a recent vote to annex the back lot into our community development." I raised an eyebrow. "Annex? This isn't a country, lady. This is my land. It's been in my family since the 70s. She gave a rehearsed little laugh. "Well, the lines have been redrawn, and we're including your property in the new Willow Bend East expansion." "No, you're not," I said bluntly. "I didn't sign anything. You don't have the authority." Her smile vanished. "You'll find that the HOA does have certain powers under community bylaws. You may want to attend our next meeting. We'll be discussing our plans for the new community clubhouse." I blinked. "What clubhouse?" She turned without another word and climbed back into her car, leaving a small dust cloud in her wake. That was my first warning, but it wouldn't be the last. A month passed. I kept working on my uncle's old cabin, restoring the porch, rewiring the interior, and planting a garden out back. It was hard work, but honest. I didn't think much of Karen or her HOA threats. I figured once they realized I wasn't going to play along, they'd lose interest. Then the surveyors showed up. 3 of them, unannounced, walking around my land with clipboards and high-visibility vests. One of them was even hammering a marker stake into the dirt near my creek. "Hey!" I barked, storming out from the workshop. "You want to explain why you're trespassing on my property?" One of the men, clearly flustered, looked up from his blueprint. "We were told this was HOA property. We're laying out the dimensions for the new clubhouse foundation." My jaw clenched. "Get off my land, now, before I call the sheriff." They didn't need more than that. Within minutes, they were packing up and mumbling apologies as they made their way back to the road. I didn't sleep much that night. The very next morning, I marched down to the county clerk's office and requested the most recent zoning and land use maps. Sure enough, someone had filed a request to redraw the district lines, but it hadn't gone through yet. It was pending, and there was no signed permission from any landowner, not me and not the previous owner, my uncle. Even worse, attached to the file was a scanned memo from the Willow Bend HOA that included a development plan for a 2-story clubhouse, complete with parking spaces, a gym, and a recreation lawn that stretched right across my backyard. That was when I knew. Karen hadn't just made a mistake, she hadn't gotten confused, she was trying to steal my land, and it was time to bait the trap. I started by calling an old friend from my Army days, now a private attorney who specializes in property law. I gave him every document I had: the deed, my uncle's will, the survey maps, even the HOA memos I had pulled from the clerk's office. His response? "You're solid. Legally, this is still 100% yours, but if they go ahead with construction before you stop it, you'll be in for a massive legal battle." So, I made a decision. I'd let them hang themselves. I wouldn't stop them, not right away. I'd document everything, every truck, every dig, every concrete pour. I'd give them enough rope to build their own noose, and then I'd snap it shut. It didn't take long for Karen to take the bait. 3 days after the surveyors had left, a fleet of trucks rolled onto my land. Cement mixers, backhoes, utility vans, the whole circus. They didn't even bother knocking. They just cut through my fence and started clearing trees like it was their God-given right. I watched from my cabin window, phone in hand, camera rolling. Every tree they felled, every shovel in the ground, I caught it all. Time-stamped, geo-tagged, legally preserved. Evidence. Karen showed up around noon, wearing her usual pastel pink and that smug little smirk like she'd already won. She stood in the middle of the chaos, pointing, directing, pretending to be some kind of general overseeing a battlefield. "Make sure the foundation extends 20 feet past the creek line," she yelled. "We want plenty of space for the garden terrace." The garden terrace? That was where I'd buried my dog Buck years ago. This land wasn't just property, it was personal, sacred. I stepped out and leaned on the porch railing, arms crossed. Karen spotted me and gave me a mock wave. "Don't worry, Daniels, you'll have first dibs on a clubhouse membership." I didn't reply. I just stared. She must have taken that for intimidation. In truth, I was smiling inside. She had just publicly admitted, in front of a dozen workers, that she knew this was my land. I recorded that, too. Over the next 2 weeks, construction accelerated. A full concrete foundation was poured, wooden framing went up, and they even brought in electrical crews to start wiring the future clubhouse. All of it on my land. All of it without a single legal right to do so. I filed a quiet injunction with the county court through my attorney. We didn't stop them immediately. That wasn't the point. The goal was to wait just long enough to let them invest everything. Time, materials, labor, money. Because once the cease and desist came down, they wouldn't just lose a project. They'd lose their bank accounts trying to clean it up. The real turning point came when I got a call from a woman named Eleanor. She lived in the main neighborhood block, one of Karen's so-called inner circle, at least until recently. She spoke in a hushed voice like she was calling from enemy territory. "Mr. Daniels," she whispered, "I thought you should know. Karen's been lying to the board." I sat forward. "About what?" "She told us the land had already been purchased, that the HOA bought it from you directly. She showed us a fake contract, something with your name typed on it." My jaw clenched. Fake contract? Yes. And when a few of us started asking questions, she threatened us with fines. Said we'd be in violation of the HOA charter for undermining community development. She's lost it. "Are you willing to testify to that?" I asked. There was a long pause. Then, "Yes, I'll do what's right." I thanked her, hung up, and called my attorney immediately. The net was closing in. 2 days later, the county finally processed our injunction. A formal cease and desist was delivered to the HOA's mailbox. But Karen, being Karen, ignored it. They kept building. Insane, right? The woman had so much arrogance she thought the law didn't apply to her, that she could bully her way through bureaucracy like she had with the neighbors for years. So I did what any veteran with a bone to pick would do. I called the local news. Channel 7 was the first to bite. They loved stories about crooked HOAs, especially when the villain was someone like Karen. Rich, blonde, entitled, and totally out of touch. I met their reporter, a sharp young guy named Marcus, at the edge of the construction site. He panned the camera across the site. Bulldozers, construction crews, Karen's tacky "Future Home of the Willow Bend" clubhouse banner flapping in the breeze. "And this is all on your land?" Marcus asked. "Every inch of it," I replied. "I have the deed. I have the will. I have the surveyor's maps, and I have footage of them trespassing, destroying property, and building without a permit. Marcus grinned. She's not going to like this. Good, I said. She's not supposed to. The story aired that night. HOA builds $200K clubhouse on land they don't own. Homeowner fights back. Karen's face was front and center, captured in high def as she barked orders and posed in front of the illegal building like she was the Queen of England opening a hospital wing. By morning, the video had gone viral locally. Comments flooded in. This is why people hate HOAs. She needs jail time. He should sue for everything she's got. Karen tried to put out the fire by releasing a statement through the HOA's newsletter, a passive-aggressive email claiming I was attempting to obstruct community progress through unnecessary legal aggression. Bad move, because right after that my lawyer filed the full lawsuit: trespassing, destruction of private property, illegal construction, harassment, and fraud. I sued Karen personally. Not the HOA, her, because every order, every lie, every decision had her fingerprints on it, and that meant she could be held personally responsible. That afternoon, I watched from my porch as 2 county sheriffs rolled up to the construction site. They didn't say a word. They walked straight to the workers and handed them a court order. "Cease all activity immediately," one of them said. Karen came running out like she'd just been told her poodle died. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked. One of the deputies calmly handed her a copy of the injunction. "This is a court order, ma'am. You're in violation of multiple property codes and zoning laws. If you continue construction, you'll be in contempt of court." Karen's face went pale. "This is a mistake. This is our land." The deputy pointed at me. "Actually, ma'am, that's the owner right over there." Karen turned, saw me standing with my arms crossed, and for the first time, the very first time, she looked scared. And I wasn't even close to done with her yet. The news spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, half the town had seen Karen's meltdown on TV, and the other half were gossiping about it at the post office, the supermarket, and the barber shop. She had gone from powerful HOA president to that lady who built a clubhouse on someone else's land. But while the public roasted marshmallows over her burning reputation, I was focused on the real battle: court. The first hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. My lawyer, Davis, came over the night before with a folder thick enough to crush a squirrel. "I've got the deed, the satellite footage, timestamps from the construction crews, the fake contracts Karen showed the board, and Eleanor's signed affidavit," he said, flipping through the pages. "Honestly, this is going to be like bringing a bazooka to a thumb war." I nodded. "She'll probably try to bluff her way out again." Davis smirked. "Let her. The judge isn't going to be impressed by Karen's HOA war stories." The morning of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse dressed in my best pressed jeans, flannel, and boots. Karen arrived 30 minutes late in a full beige pantsuit, sunglasses indoors, and dragging a massive leather purse like it contained the Magna Carta. She strutted in like she owned the place, and immediately tripped over a chair leg. The bailiff didn't even blink. "Court is now in session," the clerk announced as the judge entered, the Honorable Judge Rosalind Keller presiding. Judge Keller was known around town as no-nonsense. Former military, sharp eyes, zero tolerance for theatrics. I could practically see Karen's confidence draining as soon as the judge sat down. We laid out everything. Davis presented the property deed, the original land survey, photos of the construction, videos of Karen directing workers, and Eleanor's statement about the fake contract Karen circulated to the HOA board. Karen's lawyer, some poor guy who clearly got roped into this mess last minute, looked like he wanted to crawl into the floor. Judge Keller read through the documents carefully, pausing only to raise an eyebrow at the cease and desist Karen had blatantly ignored. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, finally looking up, "do you have any explanation for why you began construction on land that doesn't belong to your HOA?" Karen stood, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "Your Honor, we were told by the previous HOA president that this land was part of our jurisdiction. We had a vote. The community supported the decision. "Votes don't override deeds, Mrs. Reynolds," the judge cut in sharply. "You trespassed. You ordered unauthorized construction. You ignored a court order." Karen opened her mouth again, but the judge lifted a hand. "Enough. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff." Boom. Just like that. The courtroom let out a breath as Judge Keller continued. "The defendant is ordered to halt all further construction. Additionally, the Willow Bend HOA must pay all legal fees incurred by the plaintiff and restore the land to its original condition, at their own expense." Karen blinked like she'd been slapped. "Restore?" "Yes," the judge said. "Remove the foundation, dismantle the framing, replace any trees or fences destroyed during construction." Karen looked like she was going to pass out. "And one more thing," Judge Keller added. "Given the evidence of fraudulent documentation and your attempt to mislead both your board and the county, I am referring this case to the district attorney's office for further investigation." The color drained from Karen's face. Fraud. That wasn't just a slap on the wrist. That was criminal. Outside the courthouse, I was met with a wave of reporters and neighbors. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Answer: justice isn't done until the land is mine again, and she's no longer in power. And I meant it. Karen's removal wasn't just personal. It was necessary. Because what I didn't tell the reporters was that she wasn't finished. Not yet. That night, I received an anonymous letter in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence written in red marker. "You don't know who you're messing with." If that was supposed to scare me, it failed spectacularly. I scanned the letter, logged it as evidence, and handed it off to Davis the next morning. "If she wants to play games, I'll give her front row seats to her own downfall," I told him. He nodded. "She's digging her own grave." But what Karen didn't know was that while she was busy trying to intimidate me, her own supporters were jumping ship. Eleanor wasn't the only one speaking out anymore. In the weeks that followed the court ruling, I was contacted by at least a dozen residents, some current HOA members, some who had been fined, threatened, or manipulated by Karen in the past. I heard horror stories. One man said he was fined $2,000 for having the wrong brand of mailbox. A woman told me Karen had her daughter's lemonade stand shut down for unlicensed food sales. Another neighbor said he was threatened with legal action for parking his own trailer in his own driveway. It was madness, and I knew exactly what to do with all of it. I compiled every statement, every complaint, every ridiculous fine and fraudulent letter into a single folder, labeled it HOA Misconduct Dossier, and sent a copy to the county commissioner, the local newspaper, the state HOA Oversight Committee, and, most importantly, Karen's own lawyer. The message was clear. If she didn't step down, the next lawsuit wouldn't just be about land. It would be about her entire career and her freedom. A week later, I got word from Eleanor. She's panicking. She called an emergency board meeting and begged them to back her. Half of them refused. "Good," I said. "Time for Phase 3. Because I wasn't finished yet. Not even close. Phase 3 of my plan was simple. Take away Karen's illusion of power. She had spent years intimidating residents with her clipboard and HOA rulebook, acting like the queen of Willow Bend. But now, that crown was teetering. I just needed to give it one final push. So I did what any self-respecting enemy of HOA tyranny would do. I hosted a block party. Yeah, a full-blown, no permit, no Karen-approved, backyard barbecue-style block party. On my land. The same land where she had illegally built her clubhouse. And I invited everyone. Neighbors who had been fined into silence. Families who had moved out because of her endless harassment. Even local reporters who had covered the courthouse win. They all showed up. Folding chairs, paper plates, music, kids running around barefoot. It was everything Karen hated. And that was the point. About an hour into the festivities, just as the ribs hit the grill and Mark was passing out cold beers from his cooler, I saw her, Karen, marching down the sidewalk in a pastel pink windbreaker like she was walking into a crime scene. She was fuming, holding a manila envelope in one hand and waving her phone in the other. I could see her eye twitching as she took in the scene. Her precious clubhouse, surrounded by laughter, music, and the unmistakable scent of spicy barbecue sauce. She stormed up to me. "You're trespassing," she snapped. I smiled. "Actually, I'm standing on my legally owned land." Her nostrils flared. "You didn't file for an event permit. This party violates at least 5 HOA rules." I raised an eyebrow. "Remind me again. Who's the HOA president right now?" She hesitated, jaw clenched. That's when Mark strolled over, sipping a beer. "Technically, Karen, you're suspended pending investigation, right? You're not even allowed to issue fines. Also," I added, "this land isn't governed by the HOA, remember? Court said so." She looked like she was about to burst into flames. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I have connections. You think a judge and some newspaper article can stop me?" I tilted my head. "You mean the same judge who ruled against you in front of 30 witnesses? The one you ignored with your illegal build?" Karen blinked. She was flailing, and she knew it. I leaned in, lowering my voice. "This isn't just about a clubhouse anymore. This is about the mountain of fines, threats, and lies you've stacked up over the years, and every single one is about to come crashing down." She took a shaky breath, then shoved the manila envelope into my chest. "You've been served," she spat. "Cease and desist, and if you don't take down that slander website, I will sue for defamation." I didn't even look at the envelope. "Sure, Karen, I'll let my lawyer pin it next to your fraud report." Then I turned and walked back into the party. The crowd parted for me like I was Moses parting the Red Sea of HOA survivors. Karen just stood there, seething. And that's when I knew she was broken, but she wasn't done yet. The next week, I started receiving notices in the mail. A $1,000 noise violation from the HOA. A $750 unauthorized event fine. An invoice for land restoration fees related to my own property. Karen was throwing everything she had left at me. But the real kicker, she sent a formal request to the county office to have my land reevaluated for annexation into the HOA jurisdiction. That's when I lost it. I showed the letter to Davis, who nearly choked on his coffee. "She really thinks she can override a court ruling by filing a zoning request?" He laughed. "She's either delusional," I said, "or desperate." "Probably both." So I filed a countersuit. This time, it was personal. The suit named Karen Reynolds as an individual defendant, not just as an HOA officer. The charges? Malicious prosecution, harassment, retaliatory fines, attempted land seizure in violation of court orders. I wasn't suing the HOA. I was suing her. And once that paperwork hit her mailbox, it was like someone flipped a switch in the neighborhood. People started coming out of the woodwork with stories. One man said Karen fined him for having a non-conforming lawn chair. A mother of 3 said Karen threatened to report her to CPS over a child safety violation when her kids left bikes in the driveway. The HOA board, what was left of it, started holding secret meetings. But it didn't matter. The tide had turned. The clubhouse project was officially suspended. Karen's lawyer filed a request to settle, which we rejected. And then I got the best news yet. The county zoning board had scheduled a public hearing to review Karen's annexation request. I showed up early for the hearing, dressed sharp this time, button-up shirt, clean boots, fresh shave. Davis sat beside me, a full binder of evidence on the table. Karen walked in with her usual smugness, but no lawyer. The board opened the session. Karen launched into a rambling speech about community cohesion, shared green spaces, and bringing people together. It was all fluff, no legal standing, just buzzwords. Then the zoning commissioner turned to me. "Mr. Walker, do you have a response?" I stood. "Karen Reynolds has no legal authority to request this annexation. The land in question was ruled not under HOA jurisdiction by Judge Keller last month. Additionally, we have documented evidence of Mrs. Reynolds violating court orders, intimidating residents, and misusing HOA funds to finance unauthorized construction. The room was silent. Then the commissioner leaned into his mic. Motion to reject the annexation request? All hands went up. Motion carried. Karen didn't even wait for the session to end. She stormed out of the building, muttering curses under her breath. After the hearing, Davis turned to me and said, "You know what comes next, right?" I nodded. It was time for Phase 4, total exposure. Karen had built her reputation on fear and control. She ruled through silence and fines. But now she was vulnerable, and I was going to show the whole town exactly who she was behind that HOA badge, and I was about to broadcast it loud enough for the entire state to hear. The first domino fell with a video. It was simple. A compilation of security footage, court documents, audio clips from HOA meetings, and witness testimonials, all stitched together into a 7-minute expose titled, Karen Reynolds: How One HOA President Abused Power and Tried to Steal Private Land. I didn't post it under my name. I gave it to a local journalist who had been following the case since my first court appearance. He loved it. Posted it on his blog, his Facebook page, and eventually his YouTube channel. Within 24 hours, it had 10,000 views. Within 48 hours, it had over 100,000. By the end of the week, it had gone viral statewide. Karen's name was trending on Twitter. #HOA. Karen became a meme. Clips of her shouting at residents. Her trespass sign was posted on my land. Her voice yelling, "You'll regret this," to a group of kids playing in sprinklers. The internet ate it up. But the video wasn't just viral content, it had teeth. Because at the very end, I added one more clip, a voice recording from a private HOA board meeting. It wasn't illegal. I was invited to that meeting and hit record on my phone when Karen forgot to mute hers. In it, she says, "I don't care if the land isn't legally ours. If we make enough noise, we'll bury him in paperwork. People like that can't afford lawyers." And just like that, Karen had admitted to her plan on record. That clip? It made it all the way to a primetime news broadcast. The anchor looked straight into the camera and said, "Willow Bend residents say their HOA president may have gone too far. Tonight, allegations of abusive power, financial misconduct, and threats against neighbors, all caught on tape." Karen's empire was unraveling faster than she could scream, "Cease and desist." Meanwhile, the HOA board was in complete disarray. 3 of the 5 remaining board members resigned within the week. The vice president, an older man named Jerry, who'd always nodded through Karen's decisions, suddenly discovered a backbone. At the next emergency meeting, which I attended with a front row seat, he stood up and said, "I move that we hold a vote to remove Karen Reynolds from her position as HOA president, effective immediately." Silence. Then, murmurs of agreement. Karen stood, red in the face. "You can't do this. I built this community." Someone from the back spoke up. "No, Karen. You tore it apart." The vote was unanimous. 5-0. Karen Reynolds was officially removed. She tried to fight back, of course. Filed an injunction. Claimed the vote was illegal. Said she had documents proving the land still belonged to the HOA. But none of it stuck. Because I had something she didn't. Legal precedent. And now, public support. At the next zoning board session, I wasn't the only one speaking. Dozens of neighbors stood up one after another to share their experiences. I was fined for having a swing set. She sent me letters threatening legal action because of holiday lights. She screamed at my teenage daughter for parking on the street. One woman broke down crying while holding up a photo of her demolished flower beds bulldozed when Karen claimed they were encroaching on HOA property. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone. Then came the audit. Triggered by public outcry and a petition signed by over 200 residents, the county commissioned a full review of the HOA's financials. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Karen had been using HOA funds for lavish dinners, personal travel expenses, unapproved landscaping contracts from her cousin's company, and a $15,000 miscellaneous administrative expense that was suspiciously traced to a down payment on a second home outside the community. She wasn't just controlling, she was corrupt, and with the audit results in hand, Davis helped me file the final lawsuit: fraud and embezzlement. The target? Karen Reynolds personally. I still remember the look on her face when the sheriff served her the papers. She was watering her roses in front of her house roses that were ironically never HOA approved. He stepped out of the cruiser, asked for her by name, then handed her a thick stack of documents. "You've been served." She looked up and saw me across the street, sipping coffee on my porch. She shouted something I couldn't quite hear, but I didn't need to. The sound of her rage was drowned out by the sound of justice knocking. The community finally had its moment. A few weeks later, I hosted another block party this time, sanctioned by the new HOA board, now run by Jerry and a few other level-headed neighbors. The clubhouse, officially closed. A motion had passed to have it torn down and replaced with a public park-a-move that was met with cheers at the monthly meeting. Mark grilled burgers, kids played tag, and neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in years mingled and laughed like old friends. The best part? A homemade sign hung from the clubhouse door. Closed for good, no tyrants allowed. Later that night, I got a call from Davis. "Thought you might want to hear it from me," he said. "Karen's lawyer just called." I sat up. "Yeah?" "She's agreeing to a settlement." My heart skipped. Wait, what kind of settlement? "She's stepping down from any future HOA involvement anywhere. She's paying $60,000 in damages, and she's agreeing to sell her home and leave the Willow Bend community permanently." I blinked. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack. You won." There was a long pause. Then, for the first time in months, I laughed. A deep, full, satisfied laugh. The morning Karen moved out, the neighborhood watched in collective silence. No jeering, no yelling, no sarcasm, just quiet satisfaction. Her moving truck pulled up at 7:03 a.m. By 7:15, she was already barking at the crew for scratching the door frame and not wrapping her antique dresser properly. Her voice echoed down the street, the same shrill pitch we'd all grown used to over the years. Now just a bitter memory, boxed up and rolled out of town with the last of her overpriced patio furniture. As the truck rolled away, a cheer broke out down the street. Someone popped a bottle of champagne. Another neighbor released a few balloons. And Mark? He passed around hot peppers from his garden and said, "To spicy endings." We all laughed. It wasn't just Karen's reign that had ended, it was the culture of fear she had built. But justice wasn't done yet. See, Karen had agreed to settle financially, sure, but the fraud audit opened more doors than she could close. The district attorney's office launched a formal criminal investigation into the misappropriation of HOA funds. Turns out, embezzling tens of thousands of dollars while actively manipulating legal documents tends to get you more than just a slap on the wrist. At trial, Karen pled guilty to reduced charges to avoid jail time. She was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, full financial restitution. Her HOA privileges were permanently revoked. She couldn't join or lead one ever again. And the best part? She was legally required to send a written apology to every household in Willow Bend. It came typed, no signature, clearly sent by her lawyer's assistant. But still, there was something poetic about holding in my hand a note from Karen herself that read, "I acknowledge my actions caused harm to the community, and I sincerely apologize for the distress and financial damage I caused." Framed it, right above my mailbox. Fitting, really. As for the clubhouse, well, it came down in pieces. It started with a unanimous vote at the next HOA meeting. Jerry, now president, stood tall and confident. "The clubhouse," he said, "was built without proper permits. It violated zoning laws, and worst of all, it became a symbol of abuse. I propose we demolish it and use the land to build a public park." Everyone applauded. Weeks later, the bulldozers rolled in. Neighbors gathered again, just like they had for Karen's departure. Except this time they brought snacks, chairs, and cameras. Someone printed out a life-size cardboard cutout of Karen and placed it in front of the construction tape. "One last meeting," they joked. As the walls came down, so did the last reminder of Karen's tyranny. We toasted its demolition like it was New Year's Eve. In the months that followed, something incredible happened to Willow Bend. It changed. People started planting gardens again. Kids rode their bikes freely without fear of unauthorized recreational activity fines. Porch decorations flourished. Solar panels were installed. Paint colors got bolder. And you know what? Property values went up. Not because of stricter enforcement or arbitrary HOA rules, but because people actually wanted to live here. Because the neighborhood became a community again. Mark and I worked with Jerry and a few others to launch the Willow Bend Community Association. Not an HOA, just a volunteer group dedicated to real improvement. We organized monthly cleanup days, seasonal events, even a community pantry box by the new park. No fees, no fines, just neighbors helping neighbors. And every time someone new moved in, we made sure to hand them two things. 1. A welcome basket with homemade salsa, courtesy of Mark's Peppers. 2. A printed, framed photo of Karen's face mid-scream from her last board meeting, just to remind us how far we'd come. One evening, as I stood by my garden with a glass of iced tea in hand, Mark walked over with a grin. "You ever think we'd be here?" he asked, motioning to the street filled with laughing kids, blooming gardens, and friendly neighbors. I looked around. "I hoped we would," I said. "Just didn't think it would take this much firepower to get here." He chuckled. "Sometimes you gotta bait the tyrant to expose the rot." I nodded. "And sometimes you have to demolish the clubhouse to rebuild the neighborhood." He raised his glass. "Debate and justice." We clinked. Looking back, Karen didn't lose everything because of one mistake. She lost because she believed she was untouchable, that no one would fight back. But we did. And when we did, it didn't just stop her, it set the whole neighborhood free. So, if you're ever facing an HOA tyrant who thinks they own your land, your voice, your peace, just remember this: plant your garden. Know your rights, document everything, and never underestimate the power of a well-laid trap, because when the moment comes, they'll fall for it. Hook, line, and clubhouse.